Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear. Today I've got another knife to show you. This is one of the knives that has been in my collection the absolute longest, and it will forever be in my collection because it was a gift from my wife before she was even my wife. So kind of a funny story. My dad came home from a gun show back in like 2011 and had purchased one of these for himself and one for my brother because it was my brother's birthday coming right up. And he had gotten the partially serrated version, but other than that, the exact same knife as this. And so I was super jealous. The nicest knife I think I had at that time, what I would have been carrying would have been a Cold Steel AK-47, back when they had kind of the Axis style lock on them. And I really liked that knife. But I had also owned a Ken Onion, I think it was called the Leak, the Kershaw spring assisted, still a very popular knife to this day. But yeah, I had owned one of those and also carried that quite a bit, and I really liked it. I was into spring assisted knives at the time. If you can remember back to 2010, 2011, that was kind of a trend. I think it was actually popular, whereas now it's definitely kind of faded out of favor. But yeah, so when my dad and my brother each got one of these, I was super jealous. And my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, she took note of how much I wanted one, and she bought me this just kind of out of the blue as just a generous thing to do. So I was super stoked. This was at that time probably the most expensive knife that I had ever owned, except for maybe Benchmade my dad had given me. I'll do a review on that soon. That's called the Sentinel. But yeah, this was brand new at the time. Zero tolerance was pretty new on the scene. I had carried a lot of Kershaws and really liked Kershaw knives, so this made a ton of sense for me. The cool thing is, this is my only spring-assisted knife, I think, that I still have in the collection. I might have some like budget pieces that don't live in my primary knife case that are spring-assisted. I think I've got an HK, that is. Anywho, even though this thing is spring-assisted and a little bit different from the style of knives that I typically carry now, I still really love the ZTO 350. Part of it is definitely the sentimental value of it, but there's also a lot of really great things about this knife. And after owning it for coming up on 10 years now, I definitely have a lot of experience with it. I've used this knife a ton. This knife lived in my pocket for years. This was before I was really into knife collecting and really only had a couple of knives. This was my go-to carry for a very long time. Back then, I was probably carrying it tipped down. I think I only switched this clip to tip up maybe 3 years ago, if even that. And this was like before I even had Torx bits to work on my own knives. This knife has never been disassembled. I've never had to adjust the pivot, anything like that. All that I've done on this knife is sharpen it. I've had it sharpened once or twice before I was into sharpening, and I've sharpened it once or twice myself as well. I just have a Lansky, relatively cheap guided sharpener, and this, I don't know what blade steel this even is. I don't know what they were using on it back then, but it's held an edge decently well. It sharpens fairly easily. It gets really sharp. Yeah, this thing has just been really impressive to me. But the design is, compared to what I typically carry these days, definitely unique. It's got an interesting blade shape. It's definitely a really tall blade. And then you've got this kind of recurve under this portion. And then you've got belly here coming to a bit of a drop point. It is a flat grind for this bevel here. And then you've got a flat up on top with a bit of a swedge. This one is coated black, as you can see. This knife, I believe, also comes in like a stonewash version, a satin version. I know there's a tiger stripe version. There's been quite a few throughout the years, and I'm pretty sure you can still get this model today. I don't know if it's just because there's some left or if they're still making them or what. I do see them on the secondary fairly regularly as well. And if you want a zero tolerance at kind of an entry, like more budget price point, this is one of the ones that can probably be had for about the cheapest. Ergonomically, this knife fits in my hand really well. I will say it feels like the height, the tallness of these scales is, I can feel that it's like tall and flat if that makes sense. The way it fills my hand, it doesn't have any contouring, any swell to the scales, anything like that. So it kind of feels a little bit like a slab. It's not like an ergonomic dream. But that said, the way that the profile of these scales is cut, I do have a great spot for my finger to index right here with my pointer finger. And then this curve fits my other 3 fingers just right. If you had much bigger hands than me, you might hang off a little bit. And then, yeah, the back swell here as well does fit kind of into the ball of my palm, if that's the right term. And it just works. It's got some pretty aggressive jimping right here. Definitely feels really locked in when you press down on that. You've also got this kind of notch here, the way the blade is ground, this flat spot right up past the jimping for your thumb to land if you're doing push cuts. I really like that. I find myself putting my thumb there a lot when I'm actually cutting with this knife. It's of course a liner lock. I believe these are titanium liners. I could be wrong. I had this knife for way too long. And when I bought it, I wasn't like looking at specs, or when it was bought for me, I should say. When I wanted one originally, I wasn't a knife nerd like I am now. But yeah, it's a great liner lock. Lockup is super solid, super reliable. I've never had an issue with lockup. Being a speed safe assisted opening, it fires out every time. I've never had this knife apart. I've never had to adjust or replace any springs or anything like that. It's just been downright reliable. I really like that the thumb studs also double as the blade stop. I think that's really cool. I feel like it adds to kind of the robust nature of this. They do work perfectly as thumb studs as well. Let's see if I can middle finger flip it. I don't think I can. The way it sits on the backside is a little tight, but yeah, this knife is a lot of fun. I've kind of moved away completely from spring-assisted knives. They're just not my preference anymore. It's not that I won't own them or that I hate them or anything like that, but I will say that I just don't prefer it to a good flipper on bearings or washers or basically any other deployment method. And the reason is more so for closing the knife than anything else. I also find that just having a well dialed in detent on a good flipper on bearings, you're going to fire just as hard as that. It may take a little bit more of a push from the finger to get past that detent, but it's not like a modern flipper isn't gonna fire reliably hard like a speed safe knife will. And then yeah, just having to kind of press past that spring to close it. I prefer a knife that I can just shake shut, and that's never gonna happen on this one because you have to get past a spring that's designed to fling the knife open. So it has to be pushed in, which it's not the end of the world. This functionally as a knife with speed safe works fantastic, and I can see why some people still really like speed safe, and Kershaw has every right to keep using it if it's working for him, but I tend to prefer knives and even just models from Kershaw that don't have that anymore. There are still a few ZTs, I think, in recent years that have actually come out that still use this as well, although they've mostly moved away from it on ZT, because I think with ZT being the more premium brand and people being more focused on action on premium knives, it feels a little dated to me, and I think the market has dictated that as well. But yeah, this knife is just, this feels like it's a real part of ZT's identity, because when ZT started, their knives were very much like this. They were G10 liner locks or frame locks that were just overbuilt, super robust. There's nothing dainty about this knife. This knife is very kind of tactical. There's even jimping back here for reverse grip, and it just feels, I don't know, to me, maybe because I have had this for so long, this is who ZT started as, in my opinion. Their early models were this and knives kind of like this, and so I just think it's cool to kind of have, in my opinion, it's almost like a piece of zero tolerance history. I still really like zero tolerance as a brand. The only other zero tolerance I have right now is my 0620, which my wife also bought me. She was my wife at that point, not my girlfriend. But I've owned, I don't know, probably at least 7 or 8 ZTs total. I've had the 562 CF, I've had the 609, I've had an 801 tie, I don't know, I'd have to look back, frankly, to see all the ones that I have owned and either sold or traded. But I've had great experiences with the brand. I've always found them to be reliable. I found them to come sharp from factory. They're not always like super thin, slicey knives, but that's kind of not the identity of ZT, in my opinion. I know in the last year or so, they've come out with quite a few other knives that are a little more focused on being smaller, lighter, more EDC friendly. But I think part of why a lot of people like ZT is because they made knives like this. And it's cool to see that now they just came out with recently, I think it's called the 308. And that knife reminds me a ton of this, except it's a titanium frame lock. It's still got a G10 show scale, and the lines of it remind me of the 350, and it just kind of feels like kind of a beckoning back to this type of knife that ZT was making. So maybe I'll try one of those out here soon. I also want to try the 640 and maybe put a micarta scale on it or something. But anywho, I really like the 0350. This knife these days, frankly, is more common for me to be a knife that I keep in a car, or just one that I don't necessarily carry all that often, but I definitely keep it around. If I'm cutting something around the house, it's not uncommon for me to reach for this knife, especially because it's a forever knife for me. I'm not worried about ruining the value on this knife. I've already beat it to crap so many times. It's held up incredibly well. It's in great shape, frankly, considering how mean I've been to it with all the tasks I've put it through. But yeah, this is a knife that I'm never afraid to pull out and use for just about any knife that reasonably or any task that reasonably requires a knife. So yeah, the ZTO 350, in my opinion, although it's a little bit dated these days, if you're somebody who still likes speed safe, if that's a feature that you enjoy, then this is a great option from Zero Tolerance. The ergos for me work great. It's not crazy overweight for its size. It's definitely not a light knife, but with the G10 on liners construction, the fact that you can move the clip to any of the 4 positions that you like, the fact that there's multiple deployment methods, I think there's a lot of ways that this knife is still a win. I'll have to look up what blade steel this is, because I have a feeling it's probably not what would be considered a super steel these days. I don't know what they were using at the time, but I've been really impressed with whatever steel this is. It's held an edge well. It's been fairly easy to sharpen. Maybe it was S30V or something. I really don't know what they were using. But anywho, yeah, I really like the 0350. It works for me. It's a knife that I don't feel bad putting to work. And so I think that's that speaks volumes of it. But let me get it up here a little bit closer. You can see there's definitely some wear on it. I apologize, it's so bright there in the direct sun. But just a really different, kind of unique shape and profile compared to a lot of the other stuff that's out there. This blade shape, it's very atypical for me to have something with recurve in it, but I found that I'm able to sharpen it just fine. Yeah, it works really well. Speed safe is fun. At least on deployment, it's fun to just flick out all day, every day. I've definitely done this a ton of times with how much this knife has been in my pocket over the years. So anywho, I'm gonna stop rambling about it, but I definitely like the ZTO 350, and hopefully you enjoy my real use review of it.